Support for this project is provided by WD-40 Company. Click on the link in the description to learn more about WD-40 products. My friend Sam and his team at Vermont Glove make the best work gloves I've ever worn. Very comfortable, very durable, 100% made in the United States in the town of Randolph, Vermont. So definitely check them out. I'll have a link in the description. So he had a few of these laser cut signs made, and I'm going to frame this one up. I want to make it double-sided, and I also want the sign to be able to stand on its own, with the idea that they can bring the sign to a trade show, maybe put some gloves around it, and the sign won't fall over. I'll start by cutting the boards to a rough length. I'm making the frame out of reclaimed white oak that I got from my friends at the Real Antique Wood Mill. This board came from the Pitney Barn in Mendham, New Jersey. Now I'm ready to rip the material to width, and once I finish that, I'm going to resaw the material to thickness, and that's because I don't have a thickness planer. I'm using the crosscut sled to put a square edge on the boards, then I'll set up a stop block and cut the parts for the bottom and top of the frame to the finished length. And now I'll repeat the process when I cut the sides of the frame. I've drawn two reference lines on the platform of my benchtop mortiser. I'll hold the board at that line and against the fence and make the first mortise. Then I'll flip the board around and hold the edge of the board at this reference line and make the second mortise. Now I can adjust the fence back, and I'll repeat the process and finish the mortise. The mortises really didn't work out that well. They're not bad, but they're not perfect. So I've readjusted the fence, and now I'm going to hold the board like this against the fence and take a little bit off the back, and then I'll readjust the fence again and take a little bit off the front. I've cleaned up the back of the mortise on all four boards, so now I can readjust the fence and clean up the mortise in the front. I wanted a little more material on the end of the board, so I've made the mortise off center, and I'll need to make the tenon off center. So I've got this piece of scrap wood here, and the first mortise I'll cut will be, or the first cut on the tenon will be the inside cut. I've adjusted the height of the blade and set up a stop block, and next I'll cut the inside half of the tenon on both boards. I've readjusted the height of the blade, and now I'm cutting the second half of the tenon. I've readjusted the height of the blade. I'll keep the stop block in the same position and cut the shoulders of the tenon. After cutting the tenons on the table saw, I'll clean up the cuts with a sharp chisel. I'm dry fitting the frame together, and I wanted to point out that this board has two very different sides. This side of the board is much darker than this side of the board, and when I was cutting the mortise and tenon, I made sure to keep that in mind and have the dark side of the board on the inside of the frame on all four pieces. I've got a pretty nice fit, and the next step is to use the table saw and cut a space for 2 splines in the tenons. Now I'll use the table saw to cut the walnut splines, just a little bit heavier than 1/8 of an inch. After cutting the splines to length, I'll use a sanding block and add a slight taper to the ends. I'm using a dovetail bit in the router to cut the tenons. A straight bit would work just as well. It just happens that this router bit is actually stuck in this router. Back at the joiner, I'll square up the edge of this old white oak board. Now that I have the frame assembled, I'll make a little cove molding to hold the sign in place. After ripping the material to width and thickness, I'll use a cove bit in the router to cut the profile of the molding. I've set the fence at 11/16 to rip the molding to size. Now I'll use the cove molding to trim one side of the frame, and then I'll drop the sign in place, and then I'll trim the other side. I've set my marking gauge, and I'll mark the inside of the frame so I have an equal distance on both sides. I'm using a little wood glue and a 23 gauge pin nailer to attach the molding to the inside of the frame. With the frame finished, it's time to move on to the support feet. I'll start by cutting the parts to width and then resawing them to thickness. These are the feet of the sign. I've already checked to make sure the lap joint fits. And now I'm going to taper the feet for a little bit nicer of a look. I'm measuring up 3/4 of an inch from the bottom, 3/4 of an inch from the lap, and I'll connect those marks. And I'll make this cut with the bandsaw. I'm using the jointer to remove the blade marks from the bandsaw and clean up the cut. I've got a chamfer bit in the router, and I'll put a slight chamfer on the edge. After giving the frame its final sanding, I'm ready for finish, and for this project I'm using Osmo, and this is a oil wax finish. I apply the finish with a brush and then remove most of it with a clean rag, rubbing in the direction of the grain. Well, I'm really happy with the way this project turned out. I love the through Mortise and Tenon with the walnut splines. It's just a very classy joint, and I'm definitely going to incorporate that in a furniture build in the near future. A big thank you to WD-40. WD-40 is a great product. I use it all the time. I used it today actually for greasing my lawnmower. So WD-40 company makes more than just your classic WD-40. Definitely check them out. I'll have a link in the description. And if you're looking for a great pair of work gloves, treat yourself to a pair of Vermont gloves. These things are just awesome. I mean, they just make you want to go out and do some work. So definitely check them out. I'll have a link in the description. And it's really cool to see the people who make your gloves. It's a team of 8 skilled makers making a wonderful product right here in America, in the beautiful state of Vermont. So very cool. And if you're not familiar with my Maker's Mob, I hope that you'll check out my Maker's Mob. Click on the link in the description, and that's where I teach step-by-step how to build furniture. You'll find my tutorials along with professional plans that will help you build beautiful furniture for your home. As always, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.